The centuries roll backward. The empire breathes again. The warm light of a dying sun falls across columns of pale limestone, rising in perfect rows from a terrace carved into the living rock of the Iranian plateau. This is Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of the greatest empire the ancient world ever knew. The Apadana staircase stretches outward, its surface alive with carved figures, 23 delegations from every corner of a realm that once stretched from the shores of the Aegean Sea to the banks of the Indus River. Medes in rounded caps walk beside Babylonians bearing textiles, Ethiopians carrying ivory, Indians offering gold dust. Every figure is rendered with care, with dignity, with a message meant to endure across millennia. And it has endured. The stone still speaks. This is Persia. Not merely a kingdom, but an idea, a radical experiment in governing the known world, not through terror alone, but through tolerance, infrastructure, and law. It began with scattered tribes drifting south from the Central Asian steppes around 1500 years before Christ, filtering through the Zagros Mountains into a land of high valleys and arid plains. For centuries, these people lived in the shadow of older powers, Elam, Assyria, Babylon, Media. Then a young vassal prince named Cyrus inherited the small kingdom of Anshan, and within 20 years, the world was his. What follows is a complete journey through the entire arc of Persian civilization. We will walk alongside those early migrants as they descend from the highlands into the province of Fars. We will witness the astonishing conquests of Cyrus the Great, the administrative genius of Darius I, and the construction of this very city rising stone by stone from the plain. We will trace the royal road across 2,700 kilometers of empire, stand before Zoroastrian fire altars where priests chanted hymns to Ahura Mazda, and march with Xerxes toward the narrow pass at Thermopylae. We will enter the daily lives of ordinary people, the farmers tending Qanat-irrigated fields, the women recorded in treasury tablets receiving wages for skilled labor, the goldsmiths shaping rhytons of breathtaking beauty. But this story does not end with the last Achaemenid king. We will follow Persia through its transformation under the Seleucids, its rebirth under the Parthian Arsacids, who humbled Rome at Carrhae, and its final flourishing under the Sasanian dynasty, whose soaring arch at Ctesiphon still stands as testament to imperial ambition. We will be there when the Arab conquests reshape the region forever, and we will discover how Persian language, art, and thought survived, woven so deeply into the fabric of Islamic civilization that they could never be erased. This is not a collection of fragments. This is the complete history of a civilization that attempted to organize the entire known world, from its origins among nomadic herders to its enduring legacy in modern governance, religion, and art. The concept of universal human rights traces a symbolic lineage to the clay cylinder resting just beyond these palace walls. The gardens that inspired the very word paradise were first cultivated in these highlands. The administrative model that Rome itself would later adapt was born here, in these halls. If these journeys through the ancient world speak to something deep within, consider subscribing so that no chapter of this story is missed. Each week, the full arc of a lost civilization unfolds, from first stone to final echo. Now the torchlight flickers along the carved walls of the Apadana. The delegations are arriving. The empire awaits. Let us begin our journey. The wind moves across a grassland so vast it has no edge. Endless steppe stretches beneath a pale sky, somewhere north of the Oxus River, where the earth is flat and dry and the horizon bends into nothing. Herds of cattle drift through feather grass. Wooden carts creak under hide canopies. Somewhere around 1500 years before the Common Era, families begin to move, not in a single great exodus, but in slow generational waves, pushing southward with their livestock, their fire rituals, their songs to gods of sky and water. These are the Indo-Iranian peoples, pastoral nomads whose languages will one day branch into Sanskrit and Old Persian. They carry no written records. Their world is oral, shaped by hymns and memory. What drives them south remains uncertain, shifts in climate, pressure from neighboring groups, the pull of greener valleys glimpsed through mountain passes. Whatever the cause, over centuries they filter into the folds of the Zagros Mountains and descend onto the Iranian plateau, a land of stark contrasts. Salt deserts rimmed by snow-capped ranges, hidden valleys fed by seasonal streams, highland meadows where horses graze on wild clover. They are not arriving into emptiness. The plateau already holds one of the ancient world's great civilizations. Elam, centered on the lowland city of Susa and the highland stronghold of Anshan, has flourished for over 1,000 years. Elamite ziggurats rise in stepped tiers of sun-dried brick. Bronze workers cast elaborate vessels. Scribes press a proto-Elamite script into clay tablets. The great ziggurat of Choga Zanbil, built around 1250 years before the Common Era near modern Shush, stands as a monument of engineering ambition. 5 concentric walls surrounding a temple tower dedicated to the god in Shushinak. The newcomers from the steppe encounter this world gradually, settling in its margins, absorbing its techniques of irrigation and construction while maintaining their own pastoral traditions. By roughly 1,000 years before the Common Era, the migrations have deposited distinct tribal groups across the plateau. In the northwest, in the valleys south of Lake Urmia, the Medes coalesce into a loose confederation of clans. Farther south, in the highland region the Greeks will later call Persis, modern Fars province, the Pasua settle among the old Elamite territories of Anshan. The landscape of Fars itself seems to shape their character. Ringed by mountains, watered by the Kur River, fertile enough for grain and grapes, yet isolated enough to breed independence. The wider world takes notice slowly. Around 844 years before the Common Era, the Assyrian king Shalmaneser III records military campaigns against peoples he calls Paswa, marking the earliest known written reference to these tribes in any language. They appear in Assyrian annals as peripheral hill peoples, subjects of tribute demands, not yet players on the stage of empire. The Medes receive similar treatment, raided, taxed, noted in passing on stone reliefs that depict Assyrian chariots rolling through mountain terrain. Yet something is gathering in these highlands. The tribes are learning from every civilization that touches them. Elamite administrative traditions, Mesopotamian metalwork, the horsemanship of the steppe. Mud brick villages grow along river terraces. Small fortified settlements appear on hilltops overlooking the trade routes that connect Mesopotamia to the eastern plateau. The people who will become the Persians are not yet a kingdom, not yet even a name that carries weight beyond their own valleys. They are herders and farmers, keepers of sacred fires, speakers of an old Iranian tongue, watching the great powers of Assyria and Elam and Babylon contest the fertile crescent far below. Their time has not come, but the plateau holds them, shapes them, and waits. The highlands stir. By the 7th century before the Common Era, the scattered Iranian tribes of the Zagros have begun to coalesce into something larger, something with structure and ambition. Among them, the Medes emerge first. Herodotus would later record that a leader named Deioces united the Median tribes through a reputation for just arbitration, persuading them to build him a capital worthy of a king. That capital is Ecbatana, set in a high valley at the foot of Mount Alvand, where modern Hamadan now sprawls. 7 concentric walls reportedly ring the citadel, each painted a different color: white, black, crimson, blue, orange, with the innermost circuits plated in silver and gold. Whether the colors belong to history or legend, the fortress itself is real, a seat of power commanding the great east-west route through the Zagros. The Medes grow strong in a world dominated by Assyria. From Nineveh on the Tigris, the Assyrian Empire projects terrifying military force across Mesopotamia, the Levant, and into the Iranian highlands. Assyrian annals record punitive campaigns against Median chieftains, extracting tribute in horses, the prized Nisaean breed raised on the lush highland pastures east of Ecbatana, animals tall enough to carry armored riders. For generations the Medes endure this pressure, paying in livestock and submission. Then the balance shifts. Under Cyaxares, who reigns from roughly 625 before the Common Era, the Median army is reorganized. Spearmen, archers, and cavalry are separated into distinct units, rather than fighting as a tribal mass. Cyaxares forges an alliance with Nabopolassar of Babylon, sealed by a dynastic marriage. Together they turn against the weakening Assyrian Colossus. In 612 before the Common Era, the Allied forces breach the walls of Nineveh after a 3-month siege, aided by flooding from the Tigris that collapses sections of the fortifications. The city that had terrorized the ancient world for centuries falls into ruin. Its palaces, lined with carved stone reliefs depicting lion hunts and siege warfare, collapse into the mud. Assyria ceases to exist as a political entity within 3 years. The Medes inherit the northern portion of this shattered empire. Their domain stretches from eastern Anatolia to the fringes of Central Asia. Ecbatana becomes the center of the First Iranian Empire, a court where Median nobles in trousers and riding boots administer territories once ruled by Assyrian governors. The Median king commands respect from Babylon and Lydia alike. And within this Median order, tucked into the southern highlands of Fars, the small kingdom of Anshan persists. The Achaemenid clan rules here as vassals, their authority local, their obligations clear. Cambyses I, an Achaemenid prince, governs Anshan under Median suzerainty, likely married to a Median noblewoman to cement the arrangement. The Persians breed horses on the same highland pastures, worship at fire altars, speak a language closely related to Median. They are kin to their overlords, yet subordinate. The landscape of Fars tells the story of this waiting kingdom. Stone terrace walls line the valleys where barley and wheat grow in irrigated plots. Fortified hilltop compounds overlook the routes connecting the plateau to the Mesopotamian lowlands. The Persians absorb Elamite scribal traditions from nearby Susa, Median military organization from Ecbatana, and Babylonian astronomical knowledge filtering along trade roads. They are a people shaped by every power that surrounds them, yet distinct, bound by tribal loyalty to the Achaemenid house, by religious devotion to sacred fires, by a geography that offers both protection and isolation. Somewhere around 559 before the Common Era, a young man inherits this vassal throne. His name is Kurush, known to later ages as Cyrus. He rules a kingdom smaller than many Median provinces, commands an army dwarfed by his overlord's forces, and governs from the modest settlement of Anshan in a landscape of dry hills and seasonal rivers. Nothing about this inheritance suggests what is coming. The Median Empire appears unshakable, its king Astyages secure on the throne at Ecbatana, its armies the strongest on the plateau. The Persian vassal state is a footnote in a Median world. But the highlands have been shaping this people for centuries, and the shadow of Media is about to lift. The shadow lifts with astonishing speed. Within a decade of inheriting the throne of Anshan, Cyrus has transformed a minor vassal kingdom into a force that threatens the foundations of Median power. The details of his early consolidation remain partially obscured by time, but the broad strokes are unmistakable. He unifies the Persian tribes, forges alliances with discontented Median nobles, and by 550 before the Common Era, he marches against Astyages himself. The Median army, reportedly the most formidable on the plateau, fractures. Portions of it defect to the Persian side. Astyages is captured, and Ecbatana, that storied capital with its concentric walls, falls into Persian hands without destruction. Cyrus does not raze it. He does not massacre its inhabitants. He absorbs Media into his growing dominion, takes its treasury, adopts its administrative apparatus, and allows its nobility to retain positions of influence. It is a pattern that will define his reign. The plains around Pasargadae become the ceremonial heart of this new power. A palace complex rises in an open landscape of gardens and watercourses, its stone columns elegant but restrained, its audience halls designed not to overwhelm but to receive. The architecture speaks of a ruler who understands that empire is built not only by the sword, but by the willingness of the conquered to remain within the fold. By 546 before the Common Era, Cyrus turns west. The kingdom of Lydia, ruled by the fabulously wealthy Croesus from his capital at Sardis, controls western Anatolia and its access to the Aegean. The two armies clash at Pteria in an indecisive engagement, but Cyrus pursues Croesus back to Sardis and besieges the city. Within 14 days, the supposedly impregnable citadel falls. Lydian gold, the wealth that gave rise to the world's first true coinage, passes into Achaemenid control. The Greek cities of the Ionian coast, formerly Lydian subjects, now face a Persian master, yet the greatest prize lies south and east in the ancient heartland of civilization itself. Babylon, the magnificent city on the Euphrates, seat of the Neo-Babylonian Empire under Nabonidus, stands behind massive double walls stretching across the flat Mesopotamian plain. Its Ishtar Gate gleams with glazed blue bricks, depicting lions and dragons in molded relief. Its temples and ziggurats have dominated the region for millennia. But Nabonidus has alienated the powerful Marduk priesthood by favoring the moon god Sin, and discontent festers within those great walls. In 539 before the Common Era, Cyrus advances on Babylon. According to later accounts preserved by Herodotus and the Babylonian Chronicle, the city falls with remarkable swiftness. Persian forces reportedly divert the waters of a river channel, entering along the dry riverbed beneath the walls. Resistance is minimal. The transition of power is so smooth that daily temple rituals barely pause. Cyrus enters the city not as a destroyer, but as a liberator, or so the official narrative proclaims. A clay cylinder inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform records his declarations: the restoration of displaced peoples to their homelands, the return of sacred images to their temples, the honoring of Marduk as the god who chose Cyrus to deliver Babylon from misrule. The empire now stretches from the Aegean coast to the borders of India, from the southern shores of the Aral Sea to the edges of the Arabian desert. It is the largest political entity the world has yet known. Cyrus governs this immensity through a combination of military strength and calculated tolerance. Conquered peoples retain their languages, their gods, their local customs. Satraps administer provinces with significant autonomy. The genius lies not in uniformity, but in the management of diversity, the understanding that an empire of dozens of peoples and hundreds of languages cannot be held together by fear alone. Pasargadae stands as the monument to this vision. Its garden pavilions, its carved stone reliefs showing a winged figure in ceremonial robes, its open plan rejecting the fortress mentality of earlier empires, all reflect a ruler whose ambition extends beyond mere conquest. The empire breathes, trade routes lengthen, tribute flows inward from 20 lands, and from the modest hills of Fars, a dynasty barely 2 generations old commands the known world. In Babylon, the great cylinder turns slowly on the potter's wheel of history. It is a modest object, barely 9 inches of baked clay, its surface covered in Akkadian cuneiform, pressed into wet earth sometime after 539 before the Common Era. Yet the words inscribed upon it carry a weight that will echo across millennia. The text declares that Marduk, chief god of Babylon, chose Cyrus to enter the city as a righteous ruler. It announces the restoration of temples, the return of displaced peoples to their homelands, and the repatriation of sacred images that previous kings had seized. There is no boasting of slaughter, no catalogue of enemies impaled or cities burned. Instead, the cylinder presents conquest as liberation, power as custodianship. The administration of Babylon reveals the philosophy and practice. Cyrus retains the existing bureaucratic apparatus almost entirely intact. Babylonian scribes continue recording transactions on clay tablets in cuneiform. Local governors remain at their posts. The great temple of Esagila, sacred to Marduk, receives royal patronage. Babylonian festivals proceed without interruption. The conqueror governs not by erasure but by absorption, folding the ancient city's traditions into the fabric of his expanding dominion. Among the communities affected by this policy are the Jewish exiles. Deported from Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar II nearly 50 years earlier, they have maintained their identity along the canals of Babylonia. The decree permitting their return and the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, recorded in the Hebrew scriptures in the books of Ezra and Isaiah, where Cyrus is called the Anointed of God, transforms the political fortunes of an entire people. Not all choose to return. Many have built lives in Babylon, established businesses, raised families. But the permission itself becomes a foundational memory, binding Persian kingship to the narrative of divine deliverance. The empire's governance during these years operates through a system of appointed administrators who report to the central court. Babylon functions as one of several imperial capitals alongside Susa, Ecbatana, and Pasargadae, each serving different seasonal and ceremonial purposes. Revenue flows inward through tribute and taxation. Legal disputes follow local custom under imperial oversight. The machinery is pragmatic, flexible, designed to manage diversity rather than suppress it. Yet the eastern frontier remains restless. Beyond the Oxus River, the nomadic Massagetæ, horse-riding warriors of the Central Asian steppe, resist incorporation into the empire. In 530 before the Common Era, Cyrus marches east to confront them. The campaign crosses the Jaxartes River into territory that favors mounted nomads over infantry formations. Ancient accounts describe a devastating battle in which the Persian army suffers catastrophic losses. Cyrus himself falls on the field. The queen of the Massagetæ, Tomyris, according to Herodotus, recovers his body. The founder is gone. His remains return to Pasargadae, where a limestone tomb rises on a stepped stone platform in the open air. 6 tiers of cut stone support a small gabled chamber. No grand pyramid, no buried labyrinth, just clean geometry standing in a garden enclosure, austere and dignified. The tomb will survive Alexander, survive the Seleucids, survive centuries of wind and neglect. It still stands today. Power passes to his son Cambyses II, who inherits an empire stretching from the Aegean coast to the borders of India. The succession is orderly. The institutions hold. The satraps remain loyal. The system Cyrus built proves larger than any single life, its architecture of tolerance and administrative pragmatism carrying forward beyond the death of its architect into an uncertain future where Egypt waits unconquered and the throne's stability has yet to be truly tested. Egypt waits beyond the Sinai, ancient and immense, its pharaonic civilization already spanning 25 centuries. Cambyses II turns his attention southward almost immediately upon assuming the throne in 530 before the Common Era. The preparations are methodical, vast in scale, and reveal an empire that has learned to project power across impossible distances. The army assembles in the Levant. Supply lines stretch through Gaza and across the northern Sinai, a corridor of waterless desert that has broken invasions before. Cambyses secures alliances with Arab tribal leaders who station water-bearing camels along the route, transforming a lethal crossing into a manageable march. Cypriot and Phoenician fleets sail south along the coast in parallel, carrying grain and timber. The logistics alone represent an imperial machinery operating at full capacity. In the spring of 525, before the Common Era, the Persian army meets the forces of Pharaoh Psamtik III at Pelusium, near the eastern mouth of the Nile Delta. The battle is decisive and brutal. Egyptian resistance collapses. Psamtik retreats to Memphis, the ancient capital deep in the valley, but the city falls within weeks. Egypt, the oldest continuous civilization on earth, passes under Persian control. Cambyses does not simply occupy. He adopts the full titulary of the pharaohs, presenting himself within Egyptian religious tradition as a legitimate ruler blessed by the gods. Temple complexes along the Nile continue to function. Priests retain their privileges. The administrative apparatus of the Nile Valley, its tax collectors, granary officials, canal overseers, is absorbed into the satrapal system rather than dismantled. Persian garrisons settle at Memphis and at Elephantine near the First Cataract, where a Jewish military colony already serves as a frontier outpost. The Nile Delta spreads green and fertile beneath the desert sun. Date palms line irrigation canals that have been maintained for millennia. Temple pylons at Sais and Buto cast long shadows over courtyards, where Persian officials now walk alongside Egyptian scribes. The empire has swallowed the breadbasket of the ancient world. Yet something begins to fracture. Greek sources, hostile to Cambyses, paint him as increasingly erratic. An expedition sent westward to the oasis of Siwa vanishes in the desert. 50,000 men swallowed by sandstorms, according to Herodotus, though the number is almost certainly exaggerated. A campaign southward toward Nubia strains supply lines and yields no lasting conquest. Whether Cambyses truly descended into madness, or whether later accounts distort a competent but overstretched ruler, remains impossible to resolve with certainty. What is certain is the crisis that erupts in 522 before the Common Era. Word reaches Cambyses in Egypt that a man claiming to be his brother Bardia has seized the throne back in the Iranian heartland. The real Bardia had been secretly killed before the Egyptian campaign, on Cambyses' own orders, according to Darius's later account carved at Behistun. The usurper, identified in Persian sources as Gaumata, a Magian priest, has declared himself king and won support across the eastern provinces by suspending taxes and military conscription for 3 years. Cambyses begins the march home from Egypt. Somewhere in Syria in the spring of 522, he dies. The circumstances remain shrouded. Some accounts describe an accidental sword wound while mounting his horse. Others hint at suicide upon learning the revolt's success. The body of the king who conquered Egypt never reaches Persia. The empire teeters. Gaumata rules from Ecbatana for 7 months, avoiding public appearances, governing through intermediaries. The Persian nobility grows suspicious. The great families who had ridden alongside Cyrus sense that something fundamental has been stolen. Not merely a throne, but the legitimacy of the Achaemenid bloodline itself. In the provinces, uncertainty breeds rebellion. The system of tolerance and delegated authority that Cyrus built now faces its first existential test, and the man who will answer that test is already sharpening his resolve in the shadows of the imperial court. 7 men ride through the darkness toward the fortress at Sikayovati. It is September of 522 before the Common Era, and the conspiracy that will reshape the ancient world moves on horseback through the cool highland night. Darius, son of Hystaspes, a spear-bearer of royal Achaemenid blood, descended from a collateral branch of the dynasty, leads the group. Beside him ride 6 Persian noblemen from the empire's most powerful families: Otanes, Gobryas, Intaphrines, Hydarnes, Megabyzus, and Ardumanish. Each has concluded independently that the man ruling from Ecbatana is not Bardia, son of Cyrus, but an impostor. The killing is swift. The conspirators force their way into the Magian's quarters. Gaumata attempts to flee through an inner chamber. He is cut down. The body is displayed to remove all doubt. Within hours, the pretender's 7 months of shadowed rule collapse into nothing. But seizing a throne proves simpler than holding an empire. The death of the false king does not restore order, it shatters it. Within weeks, revolts erupt simultaneously across nearly every province. Babylon rises twice under separate pretenders, each claiming descent from Nebuchadnezzar. Elam rebels. Media produces its own would-be king. Persia itself fractures, with a rebel named Vahyazdata claiming to be the real Bardia. Armenia, Parthia, Margiana, Satagedia, the empire fragments into 19 separate rebellions, a cascade of opportunism and genuine grievance that threatens to dissolve everything Cyrus built. Darius responds with calculated ferocity and extraordinary speed. His generals fan out across the empire, while he personally leads armies against the most dangerous threats. The Babylonian revolt falls first, its pretender captured and impaled at the city gates. The Median rebel Phraortes is defeated, mutilated, and executed at Ecbatana. Campaign follows campaign in relentless succession. Battles in the snow-covered passes of Armenia, across the sun-scorched plains of Margiana, through the river valleys of Elam. In the span of roughly 19 months, Darius fights and wins the empire back province by province. Then he does something unprecedented. High on a limestone cliff along the road from Babylon to Ecbatana, at a site called Behistun, Darius orders his victory carved into the mountain itself. The inscription rises over 100 meters above the road, deliberately placed beyond the reach of anyone who might alter it. The relief panel shows Darius standing tall, his foot upon the prostrate Gaumata, while 9 rebel kings stand bound before him in a line. Above them all floats the winged figure of Ahura Mazda. The text beneath is carved in 3 languages, Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian, and it constitutes the longest royal inscription of the ancient Near East. Column after column recounts each rebellion, each battle, each defeated king by name and lineage. The inscription insists repeatedly on a single theme, that Darius fought for truth against the lie, that the rebels were followers of Drauga, falsehood, and that Ahura Mazda granted victory because the new king upheld Arta, cosmic truth. With the rebellions crushed, Darius reorganizes the empire into 20 satrapies, each governed by a satrap appointed directly by the throne. Fixed annual tribute amounts replace arbitrary extraction. Royal inspectors, the so-called eyes and ears of the king, travel the provinces unannounced, reporting directly to the sovereign. A standardized legal framework overlays local custom without replacing it. The empire that Cyrus imagined and built through charisma, Darius now reconstructs through system. The Behistun cliff stands in silence above the ancient road, its carved figures gazing eastward. Rain and wind slowly soften the stone, but the message endures. A king's declaration that order has been restored, that the lie has been defeated, that the empire belongs to those who serve truth. 25 centuries later, a British officer named Henry Rawlinson will scale that same cliff face, copy the inscriptions, and unlock the decipherment of cuneiform script, opening the written records of Mesopotamia to the modern world. The mountain remembers what empires forget. The plain of Mavdasht stretches wide beneath the Zagros foothills, a sweep of pale earth and dry grass, where the Pulva River bends southward through Fars province. Sometime around 515 before the Common Era, Darius I selects this ground. Not Susa with its Elamite ghosts, not Pasargadae with its memories of Cyrus, but virgin terrain at the foot of the Mountain of Mercy, Ku'e Rahmat. Here, where no older dynasty has left its mark, a new ceremonial capital will rise from raw limestone. The work begins with the earth itself. A massive terrace platform is carved and built against the mountain's western slope, partly cut from living rock, partly constructed from enormous stone blocks fitted without mortar. The completed platform stretches roughly 450 meters in length and 300 meters in width, rising more than 12 meters above the surrounding plain. Its western face presents a wall of dressed stone so precisely joined that a knife blade cannot slip between the blocks. A monumental double staircase of 111 shallow steps ascends the platform's western edge, each step broad and low enough for horses and tribute-bearers to climb with dignity. Thousands of laborers converge on the site. The Persepolis fortification tablets, over 30,000 clay documents recovered from the platform's northeastern corner, reveal a workforce that defies the assumption of slave labor. Stonemasons from Ionia carve fluted columns in the Greek manner. Babylonian brickmakers fire glazed panels of cobalt and gold. Egyptian craftsmen contribute knowledge of monumental stonework. Workers receive recorded rations of barley, wheat, beer, and wine. Women appear throughout the tablets, some receiving equal or higher payments than men for specialized tasks. This is not a monument built by chains, but by organized imperial labor, compensated and tracked with bureaucratic precision. The Apadana, the great audience hall, rises on the terrace's western side. 36 columns of grey limestone, each standing nearly 20 meters tall, support a cedar roof imported from the mountains of Lebanon. The column capitals take the form of twin-headed bulls and lions, their massive stone bodies kneeling as though bearing the weight of empire on their shoulders. The hall can accommodate 10,000 people beneath its soaring ceiling, but the Apadana's true masterpiece is not the hall itself. It is the monumental staircase on its northern and eastern facades, where relief carvings depict 23 delegations from subject nations ascending in orderly procession to present tribute. Medes in rounded caps lead the sequence, followed by Elamites carrying lion cubs, Babylonians bringing textiles and humped bulls, Armenians with horses and metal vessels, Indians offering gold dust and a wild donkey, Ethiopians presenting an okapi and elephant tusks. Each delegation wears distinctive dress carved with extraordinary precision. The folds of fabric, the texture of animal fur, the curl of beards rendered in stone with a patience that spans decades. The gate of all nations takes shape near the terrace's entrance, a square hall flanked by colossal winged bulls with bearded human heads, their forms borrowed from Assyrian lamassu, yet softened, made elegant rather than menacing. Every visitor entering Persepolis passes between these guardian figures, crossing a threshold from the ordinary world into the symbolic heart of universal empire. Cedar beams arrive by caravan from the Lebanese coast, traveling thousands of kilometers overland. Gold leaf comes from Sardis. Lapis lazuli arrives from the mines of Badakhshan in distant Bactria. The construction site is itself a map of empire, its raw materials drawn from every corner of the realm, assembled by hands speaking a dozen languages. Persepolis is never intended as a residential capital. Darius governs from Susa in winter, Ecbatana in summer. This platform on the plain of Mav Dasht serves a singular ceremonial purpose, the annual Novruz celebration, when the spring equinox brings delegations from across the empire to reaffirm their bond with the King of Kings. The staircase reliefs freeze that ritual in stone, an eternal procession that neither time nor conquest can dismiss. The columns rise, the carvings deepen. Stone by stone, Persepolis becomes the empire made visible. While Persepolis rises as the empire made visible, Darius turns his attention to the empire made traversable. A road already ancient in parts, segments dating to Assyrian military routes, is now extended, improved, and unified into a single arterial highway, stretching roughly 2,700 kilometers from the Lydian capital of Sardis on the Aegean coast to the administrative heart at Susa in the lowlands of Khuzestan. This is the royal road, and it will bind the western and eastern halves of the realm into a single functioning organism. The road descends from the Anatolian highlands, crosses the Halys River, threads through Cappadocia's volcanic landscape, passes the Cilician gates, fords the Euphrates, and enters the Mesopotamian plain before climbing again toward the Zagros passes and dropping into the Susiana lowlands. Along its length, 111 posting stations stand at intervals of roughly 1 day's travel by foot, each equipped with fresh horses, provisions, and shelter. Herodotus, writing a generation later, marvels at the system. A caravan of merchants requires approximately 90 days to traverse the full distance. The royal couriers accomplish it in 9. The mechanism is the Angaraean, a relay system of mounted riders who gallop between stations, passing sealed dispatches from one fresh horseman to the next without pause. Neither snow nor rain nor darkness halts them. A satrap's urgent message from Sardis reaches the king's hand in Susa before the moon completes its cycle. The speed is unprecedented in the ancient world, and it transforms governance. Rebellion in a distant province can be answered before it spreads. Tax receipts can be verified. Troop movements coordinated across thousands of kilometers. But roads alone do not unify an empire of dozens of languages and local economies. Darius implements a standardized coinage system, the gold daric, weighing approximately 8.4 grams, bearing the image of the king as archer, and the silver siglos at roughly 5.4 grams. These coins circulate alongside local currencies, but establish a universal medium of exchange for imperial transactions, military pay, and tribute collection. Gold flows from Lydian mines and Nubian deposits. Silver arrives from the Laurian mines of Attica and the mountains of Anatolia. The minting process itself becomes an instrument of royal authority, each coin stamping the king's image across the known world. Simultaneously, Darius designates Imperial Aramaic as the administrative language of the realm. Aramaic, already widespread as a lingua franca across Mesopotamia and the Levant, now becomes the script in which satraps file reports, treasurers record disbursements, and judges issue rulings from Egypt to Gandhara. Cuneiform persists for monumental inscriptions. Local languages survive in daily speech, but the bureaucratic sinew holding 20 satrapies together is written in Aramaic ink on leather and papyrus scrolls. Far to the southwest, another infrastructure project reshapes geography itself. Darius orders the completion of a canal linking the Nile River to the Red Sea, following a route attempted by the pharaoh Necho II decades earlier. Granite stelae erected along the canal's banks proclaim the achievement in 4 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, Babylonian, and Egyptian hieroglyphs. Ships now sail from the Mediterranean through the Nile Delta, southward along the canal, and into the Red Sea, connecting Egyptian grain production directly to Arabian and Indian Ocean trade routes. The canal stretches roughly 80 kilometers through the Wadi Tumilat, wide enough for 2 triremes to pass abreast. These systems interlock with deliberate precision. The royal road carries dispatches and troops. Standardized coinage lubricates commerce along its stations. Aramaic documentation ensures accountability across every satrapy. The Suez Canal opens maritime corridors that complement overland routes. Together they form something the ancient world has never possessed: an integrated imperial infrastructure where information, money, goods, and military force move with coordinated speed across 3 continents. The empire is no longer merely a collection of conquered territories. It is a network, and the network is the power. But beneath the roads and coins, beneath the administrative machinery binding 20 satrapies into a single organism, The pulse is something older and deeper, a spiritual architecture as carefully constructed as any palace terrace. Fire burns at its center. Not the fire of destruction, but fire as the visible presence of cosmic truth, tended in sacred vessels across the empire's vast expanse. The teachings trace back to a figure shrouded in the mists of deep antiquity. Zarathustra, known to the Greeks as Zoroaster, likely lived sometime between 1,000 and 600 years before the Common Era, though scholars debate the precise century. He emerged from the northeastern Iranian world, perhaps in ancient Bactria or Chorasmia, a priest who broke with older polytheistic traditions to proclaim a radical vision. At the summit of existence stands Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord, creator of heaven and earth, source of all that is good and luminous. Opposed to him moves Angra Mainyu, the hostile spirit, author of darkness, disease, and deceit. Between these two cosmic forces, every human soul must choose. This is the doctrine of Arta and Drauga, truth and falsehood, and it saturates the empire's official language like dye through cloth. At Behistun, carved high on the limestone cliff where Darius recorded his seizure of power, the great king declares again and again that Ahura Mazda granted him the kingdom because he followed the path of truth. The rebels he crushed were followers of the lie. This is not mere political rhetoric. It is theological conviction woven into the grammar of sovereignty itself. At Persepolis, the winged figure of the Faravahar hovers above doorways and throne scenes, a symbol scholars interpret variously as the royal glory, the divine guardian spirit, or the essence of Ahura Mazda's blessing upon righteous kingship. The Magi serve as custodians of this sacred order. Originally a Median priestly tribe, they become by the reign of Darius the empire's ritual specialists, responsible for maintaining the sacred fires, performing purification ceremonies, interpreting omens, and presiding over the critical moments of royal and communal life. No sacrifice proceeds without their chanting of sacred hymns from the Avesta, the collection of liturgical texts preserved through oral tradition across centuries. The Yasna ceremony, centered on the preparation of the sacred Hyoma drink and the tending of a ritually pure flame, forms the core of worship. Fire altars stand throughout the empire, not grand temples in the Mesopotamian sense, but elevated platforms where flames burn perpetually, shielded from contamination. At Nakshi Rostam, the cliff face northwest of Persepolis, where Darius and his successors carve their monumental tombs into the living rock, twin fire altar towers rise from the valley floor. These tower structures, known as the Kaaba-ye-Zartosht and its companion, frame the sacred landscape where kingship and divinity converge. The royal tombs themselves are carved in cruciform shape, their facades showing the king elevated on a stepped platform, supported by representatives of subject nations, facing a fire altar beneath the hovering Faravahar. Zoroastrian practice shapes daily ethics as profoundly as it shapes royal ceremony. The religion demands purity of thought, word, and deed. Water and earth are sacred elements not to be polluted. The dead are exposed to the elements rather than buried or burned to avoid contaminating soil or flame. Agricultural labor is considered holy, an act of pushing back the domain of Angra Mainyu by making barren land fruitful. The religion carries within it a vision of time itself as finite, moving toward a final renovation when truth will triumph absolutely and the world will be made perfect. These ideas ripple outward far beyond the Iranian plateau. The concepts of a cosmic battle between good and evil, of individual moral choice determining the soul's fate after death, of a final judgment and resurrection, all find echoes in the Judaism developing during and after the Babylonian exile, and later in Christianity and Islam. The Magi themselves enter Western tradition through the Gospel of Matthew, arriving from the East bearing gifts. By the late 5th century before the Common Era, as the empire approaches the great collision with Greece, Zoroastrianism has become inseparable from Persian identity. The flame that burns on every altar, a quiet declaration that truth, not mere force, sustains the order of the world. The western edge of the empire faces the sea. Along the Aegean coastline of Anatolia, a string of prosperous Greek-speaking cities, Miletus, Ephesus, Halicarnassus, Phocaea, have lived under Persian suzerainty since Cyrus conquered Lydia half a century earlier. They pay tribute, accept Persian-backed tyrants as local rulers, and trade freely within the vast imperial network. Yet resentment simmers beneath the surface, fed by the memory of autonomy and the example of free city-states across the water on the Greek mainland. In 499 before the Common Era, the spark catches. Aristagoras, the ambitious tyrant of Miletus, having failed in a Persian-sponsored expedition against the island of Naxos, reverses course entirely. He renounces his own tyranny, encourages other Ionian cities to expel their Persian-appointed rulers, and sails to mainland Greece seeking military support. Sparta refuses. But Athens, bound to Miletus by ancient kinship ties, sends 20 warships. Eretria on the island of Euboea contributes 5 more. This small fleet crosses the Aegean and joins the rebel forces in a march inland toward Sardis, the old Lydian capital and seat of the western satrapy. The lower city burns. The flames consume the temple of Cybele, the great Anatolian mother goddess, and the smoke rises over the Hermus Valley like a signal fire visible across the empire. The rebels retreat to the coast, pursued and defeated by Persian cavalry near Ephesus. The Athenians sail home and send no further aid. But the burning of Sardis has crossed a threshold. When word reaches Darius at Susa, the king asks who these Athenians are. According to Herodotus, he orders a servant to repeat 3 times at every dinner the words reminding him of Athens. The insult demands an answer that transcends the Ionian revolt itself. The suppression takes years. Persian forces methodically reclaim the coastal cities. A Phoenician fleet defeats the Ionian navy at the Battle of Leyte in 494 before the Common Era, and Miletus falls shortly after. The city is sacked, its population deported to the mouth of the Tigris. The revolt collapses. But Darius's response extends beyond punishment. He sends his son-in-law Mardonius to reorganize Ionia, and remarkably, the Persian administration replaces several tyrannies with democratic governments, a pragmatic concession designed to remove the grievance that fueled rebellion. Then comes the reckoning with Athens. In 490 before the Common Era, a Persian expeditionary force under the commanders Datis and Artaxerxes crosses the Aegean with perhaps 600 ships. Eretria is besieged, captured, and its population enslaved. The fleet then lands on the northeastern coast of Attica at the Bay of Marathon, a crescent of flat ground between mountains and sea, chosen because its terrain favors cavalry. The Athenians march out to meet them with roughly 10,000 hoplites, joined by perhaps 1,000 Parthians. No Spartan reinforcements arrive in time. The Athenian general Miltiades, who knows Persian tactics from years spent in the Chersonese under Persian authority, makes a critical decision. He thins the center of his line and strengthens both wings. When the armies clash, the Persian center pushes forward, but the reinforced Athenian flanks drive inward, enveloping the Persian forces in a devastating double embrace. The rout carries to the shoreline. Persian soldiers flee toward their ships, many drowning in the coastal marshes. Herodotus records 6,400 Persian dead against 192 Athenians. The numbers may carry patriotic inflation, but the outcome is beyond dispute. The expeditionary force withdraws. The fleet attempts to sail around Cape Sunion toward undefended Athens, but Miltiades force marches his army back in time, and the Persians, seeing the hoplites already arrayed on shore, turn for Asia. Marathon does not wound the empire. It is a frontier setback, a failed punitive raid against a minor city-state on the western periphery. The 20 satrapies continue to function, tribute flows, Persepolis rises. But the defeat lodges in Darius's mind like a thorn. Preparations begin immediately for a far larger invasion, one that will bring not a raiding force but the full weight of imperial power across the Aegean. Darius will not live to see it carried out. He dies in 486 before the Common Era, and the vow of vengeance passes to his son Xerxes, who inherits both a throne and an unfinished war. Xerxes inherits an empire at its apex and a grudge that demands satisfaction. 4 years pass in preparation, 4 years of conscription, shipbuilding, and the accumulation of grain stores across staging depots from Sardis to the Thracian coast. Herodotus records an army of over 1,700,000, a figure modern historians reduce dramatically, though even conservative estimates place the invasion force between 100,000 and 300,000 soldiers drawn from every corner of the empire. Persians march alongside Ethiopians, Indians alongside Lydians, Bactrian cavalry alongside Phoenician sailors. It is the largest military assembly the ancient world has witnessed. The first obstacle is geography itself. The Hellespont, that narrow strait separating Asia from Europe, must be crossed. Engineers lash together 2 bridges of boats, roughly 670 vessels bound by flax and papyrus cables, their decks planked and railed to form a continuous roadway. When a storm destroys the first attempt, Xerxes orders the waters symbolically lashed with 300 strokes and branded with hot irons. New cables are stretched. The army crosses in 7 days and 7 nights without pause, infantry and cavalry and baggage trains flowing from one continent to another. Through Thrace and Macedonia the columns advance, shadowed offshore by a fleet of perhaps 1,200 warships. At the narrow coastal pass of Thermopylae in late summer of 480 before the Common Era, a small Greek blocking force waits. King Leonidas of Sparta commands roughly 7,000 allied troops positioned between the cliffs and the sea. For 2 days the pass holds. The immortals, Persia's elite 10,000-strong guard in their embroidered robes and gold-fitted spears, assault the narrows and are repulsed. The terrain negates numerical superiority. Then a local Greek named Ephialtes reveals a mountain path. Xerxes sends the immortals over the ridge by night. Leonidas, learning of the encirclement, dismisses most allies and remains with 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans. They die to the last effective fighter, buying time that becomes legend. Thermopylae opens the road south. Boeotia submits. Athens is evacuated on the urging of Themistocles, who has persuaded the assembly to trust the fleet. Persian forces enter an empty city and burn the temples of the Acropolis in deliberate retribution for the destruction of Sardis 2 decades earlier. The sacred olive tree of Athena is ash, but the war pivots on water. The Greek fleet of perhaps 370 triremes takes position in the narrow strait between the island of Salamis and the Attic mainland. Themistocles understands that Persian numerical advantage dissolves in confined waters where ships cannot maneuver freely. In late September of 480, the Persian fleet rows into the strait at dawn. The Greek triremes, heavier and better suited to ramming, strike from advantageous positions. The channel fills with wreckage. Phoenician and Ionian vessels collide with one another in the crush. Xerxes watches from a golden throne set on the shore of Mount Aigaleo as his navy disintegrates. By nightfall, perhaps 200 Persian ships are lost. The strategic calculus shifts overnight. Without naval supremacy, the massive land army cannot be reliably supplied along extended Greek coastal routes. Xerxes withdraws to Sardis with a portion of the force, leaving his general Mardonius with an elite army of perhaps 80,000 to winter in Thessaly and finish the campaign the following year. In the summer of 479, at Plataea in Boeotia, a combined Greek army under the Spartan regent Pausanias meets Mardonius on open ground. The battle is chaotic and prolonged, but Mardonius falls and the Persian line breaks. On the same day, tradition holds, the Greek fleet destroys the remnants of Persian naval power at Maikel on the Anatolian coast. The empire does not collapse. The satrapies hold, tribute continues, Persepolis still gleams under the far sun. But the western frontier has found its limit. The Aegean will not become a Persian lake. The dream of European expansion dies on the beaches of Salamis and the fields of Plataea, and Xerxes returns to his palaces carrying the weight of an ambition the empire could fund, but not fulfill. Xerxes withdraws from Europe, but he does not withdraw from ambition. The energy that once drove armies across the Hellespont now turns inward toward stone. Persepolis, already magnificent under Darius, becomes the canvas upon which Xerxes inscribes his own vision of eternal kingship, not through conquest abroad, but through architecture that will outlast memory itself. The throne hall rises on the eastern terrace. 100 columns of fluted stone, each standing 20 meters high, support a cedar roof spanning nearly 4,700 square meters. It is the largest roofed structure in the Achaemenid world. The columns stand in 10 rows of 10, a forest of polished limestone crowned with elaborate bull and lion capitals. Massive stone doorways frame the entrances, their surfaces carved in deep relief, with scenes of the king enthroned beneath the winged disk of Ahura Mazda, attended by servants bearing parasols and fly whisks. Other panels depict the king in heroic combat with mythic beasts, a lion rearing against his blade, a composite creature subdued beneath royal strength. These are not records of actual hunts. They are declarations of cosmic order, the king as guardian between chaos and civilization. Polychrome glazed bricks line the interior walls of adjacent halls and corridors. Rows of Persian and Median archers rendered in turquoise, gold, and deep cobalt stride in eternal procession, their robes patterned with rosettes, their quivers full. The treasury, expanded under Xerxes to accommodate tribute from 23 subject nations, fills with gold vessels, silver ratans shaped like winged griffins, bolts of dyed textile, and carved ivory from the Indus. Stone reliefs within the treasury depict audiences with the king, courtiers approaching with hands raised to their lips in the gesture of reverence, guards standing rigid with spears grounded. The harem quarter, a residential complex south of the treasury, takes shape with private apartments, columned porticos, and drainage systems cut into the bedrock. Administrative tablets from this period record the movement of provisions, wine, grain, sheep, allocated to royal women and their households, evidence of a domestic economy operating within the ceremonial capital's grander machinery. Each spring, the Nowruz celebration transforms Persepolis into a theatre of imperial unity. Delegations ascend the monumental double staircase of the Apadana, their carved likenesses frozen on the facade below. Babylonians leading a humped bull, Armenians carrying a horse and metal vessels, Lydians bearing gold bracelets, Indians with bags of gold dust and a donkey. The living procession mirrors the stone one. The empire performs itself, year after year, in ritual affirmation that the world's diversity bends willingly toward a single throne. Yet behind the ceremonial splendor, the court festers. Xerxes, aging and increasingly withdrawn into the palace complex, delegates authority to courtiers and commanders whose loyalties shift with opportunity. The Greek campaigns have not destroyed the empire, but they have eroded the aura of invincibility that Cyrus and Darius once projected. Provincial governors test boundaries. Court factions maneuver for influence over the succession. In 465 before the Common Era, the conspiracy reaches the king's own bedchamber. Artabanus, a powerful courtier serving as commander of the royal guard, orchestrates the assassination of Xerxes. The details vary across ancient sources. Some implicate the eunuch Aspametris, others suggest Artabanus manipulated the king's own sons against each other. What remains consistent is the outcome. Xerxes dies by violence within the walls he built to celebrate permanence. His eldest son, Darius, is murdered shortly after, likely by Artabanus's machinations. It is the younger son, Artaxerxes, who survives, kills Artabanus, and claims the throne. The 100-column hall still stands unfinished in places when Xerxes falls. His blood stains a palace designed to project timelessness. Persepolis endures, its reliefs smiling with carved serenity, its columns holding the weight of a dynasty that has now learned what Babylon and Nineveh learned before, that the most dangerous enemies are not those who mass at distant frontiers, but those who walk the corridors of power in silence, waiting. Far from the throne rooms where kings rise and fall, the empire breathes through humbler rhythms. While Artaxerxes secures his grip on power in the mid-5th century before the Common Era, the vast machinery that feeds, clothes, and sustains 40 million subjects continues its quiet turning. The true foundation of Achaemenid dominion is not carved in stone at Persepolis, but scratched into the earth itself. In irrigation channels, ploughed furrows, and the dark underground tunnels that carry water across impossible distances. On the Iranian plateau, where rainfall barely reaches 200 millimeters in a year, the Qanat makes civilization possible. A gently sloping tunnel, sometimes stretching 40 kilometers, taps groundwater at the base of mountains and carries it by gravity alone to settlements and fields below. Vertical shafts sunk at regular intervals provide access for maintenance, their circular openings dotting the landscape like a chain of wells marching across barren ground. The engineering requires precise calculation of gradient. A drop too steep, and the water erodes the tunnel walls, too shallow, and it pools and stagnates. Qanat builders, the Muqannis, work in near darkness, chipping through clay and rock, passing debris upward in leather buckets. Thousands of these systems thread beneath the plateau during the 5th century, transforming arid basins into orchards of pistachio, pomegranate, and almond. In the Mesopotamian lowlands between the Tigris and Euphrates, a different agriculture thrives. Here the challenge is not scarcity, but management of abundance. Canal networks distribute river water across vast fields of barley and wheat. Date palms rise in dense groves, their fruit a staple that travels well and stores for months. Workers harvest grain with short sickles, thresh it on packed earth floors, and store it in mud brick granaries sealed against vermin. The Persepolis fortification tablets, over 30,000 clay documents recovered from the terrace foundations, open a window into this working world with astonishing precision. Written primarily in Elamite, they record the distribution of rations to laborers across the heartland of Fars province. Barley, wheat, beer, wine, figs, and meat move through a bureaucratic system of staggering detail. Workers receive allocations calibrated to their skill, their task, and their status. Remarkably, women performing skilled labor sometimes receive rations equal to or exceeding those of men in comparable roles. Mothers receive supplementary rations after childbirth, with additional allotments for the newborn, a system acknowledging both productivity and human need within the same administrative framework. Textile production occupies thousands of these workers. Wool from the highland flocks is sorted, carded, spun, and woven into fabrics that range from coarse utility cloth to fine garments destined for the court. The tablets record groups of women and men organized into workshops, their output measured, their supplies tracked. Linen arrives from Egypt, cotton from the eastern provinces. Dyeing operations use madder root for red, indigo for blue, and saffron for the deep yellow favored by Persian nobility. Metallurgists work copper, bronze, iron, and precious metals in workshops scattered across the empire. Iron tools, plowshares, sickles, axe heads spread through agricultural communities, increasing yields. Potters produce standardized storage vessels by the thousands, their forms so consistent they serve almost as units of measure. Beer and wine flow through the ration system in quantities that reveal their centrality to daily sustenance. Barley beer is the common drink of laborers in the lowlands. Wine, produced from vineyards across Fars and distributed through the treasury system, appears in the tablets alongside grain as a standard allocation. The records note specific vintages and qualities, distinguishing between ordinary provisions and finer stocks reserved for officials and ritual use. This is the empire seen not from the Apadana staircase, but from the granary floor, the weaving room, the Qanat shaft. It is an empire that functions because millions of hands perform tasks that no royal inscription commemorates: planting, harvesting, spinning, digging, firing clay, and recording it all on small tablets that outlast the palaces above them. But the empire is not sustained by grain alone. Alongside the rivers of barley and wine flowing through the treasury system, another current moves through the Achaemenid world, a current of gold, gemstone, ivory, and dye, carried along routes that stretch from the Indus Valley to the shores of the Mediterranean. caravans cross the high passes of the Hindu Kush, bearing lapis lazuli mined from the mountains of Badakhshan in what is now northeastern Afghanistan. The stone arrives as rough blocks, deep blue flecked with golden pyrite, and enters workshops where craftsmen cut and polish it into inlays for furniture, jewelry, and ceremonial vessels. From the same eastern reaches comes carnelian, warm and red-orange, shaped into beads and cylinder seals. Indian ivory travels westward in carved tusks, destined for throne decorations and furniture legs in the palaces of Susa and Persepolis. Egyptian workshops send gold, refined along the Nile from Nubian mines, while Anatolian provinces supply silver from the ancient mines of Lydia and the Taurus range. The Persepolis staircase reliefs catalogue this wealth in stone. 23 delegations climb the carved steps of the Apadana, each bearing the distinctive products of their homeland. Lydians carry metal vessels and armlets. Babylonians lead a humped bull and present folded textiles. Indians bring gold dust in bags and led a donkey. Ethiopians offer an okapi and elephant tusks. Armenians present a horse and a large metal vessel. Each figure wears the clothing of their nation, rendered with extraordinary precision. The folds of Median robes, the draped linen of Ionians, the wrapped garments of Gandarans. In the workshops of Susa, artisans master the technique of glazed brick manufacture inherited from Babylonian tradition and refined to new brilliance. The famous archer frieze, rows of Persian and Median guardsmen rendered in molded and glazed brick, glows in turquoise, yellow, white, and deep blue against a background of muted green. Each brick is individually shaped, fired, glazed, and assembled into panels of startling color and precision. The technique requires multiple firings at carefully controlled temperatures, a mastery of silica glazes, and an organizational system capable of tracking thousands of individual pieces. Goldsmithing reaches extraordinary refinement. The collection known as the Oxus treasure, likely assembled from a temple deposit near the Oxus River in ancient Bactria, preserves some of the finest examples. A golden chariot model, barely 15 centimeters long, carries 2 figures with meticulous detail. The horses' bridles, the chariot's wheels, the passengers' garments all rendered in miniature perfection. Gold armlets terminate in griffin heads, their horns curving upward, their eyes once inlaid with colored stone. A gold fish, hollow and delicately scaled, may have served as a container for cosmetics or perfume. The Achaemenid art style itself is a deliberate synthesis. Winged bulls guarding doorways echo Assyrian lamassu, but stand taller and leaner. Lotus and palmette borders borrow Egyptian botanical motifs. Column capitals shaped as paired bull protomes, back-to-back animal foreparts supporting ceiling beams, combine Mesopotamian iconography with a structural innovation found nowhere else in the ancient world. Greek Ionian craftsmen, documented in the Persepolis construction tablets, contribute their knowledge of stone carving and fluted column design. The result is not imitation, but fusion, a visual language that declares mastery over the artistic traditions of every conquered land. Cylinder seals, small enough to roll across wet clay, carry this imperial aesthetic into daily administration. A royal hero grasps 2 rearing lions. A winged disc representing Ahura Mazda hovers above a king at worship. Hunting scenes show mounted archers pursuing ibex across miniature landscapes. These tiny carved stones, often of chalcedony or agate, authenticate documents, seal storage jars, and mark property across the empire's vast reach. Tyrian purple dye, extracted at staggering cost from murex sea snails along the Phoenician coast, colors royal garments. A single gram requires thousands of snails. The resulting hue, deep, rich, resistant to fading, becomes synonymous with imperial authority. Persian robes dyed in purple and embroidered with gold thread appear in Greek accounts of captured war tents, provoking astonishment at their luxury. Every object tells the same story. An empire that commands the resources of 3 continents transforms raw material into a unified artistic vision, one that speaks not of any single tradition, but of all traditions gathered, refined, and reborn under a single sovereign will. That sovereign will extends beyond palace walls and treasury vaults into living landscapes shaped by water and intention. At Pasargadae, the oldest surviving example reveals the Persian genius for orchestrating nature itself. A rectangular garden divided into 4 quadrants by stone-lined water channels stretches across the royal grounds. The Shahar Bagh, the fourfold garden, a design principle that will echo through millennia of Islamic and European landscape architecture. Channels carry snowmelt from the Zagros through precisely graded limestone conduits, feeding pools that mirror the sky. Rows of ornamental trees, cypress, plane, pomegranate, line the walkways, their shade cooling the air by several degrees against the plateau's relentless heat. The Greeks who encounter these enclosed royal landscapes borrow the old Persian word pairidaiza, meaning a walled enclosure, and from their rendering the English word paradise eventually descends. These are not merely decorative spaces. The paradisos serves as a living demonstration of royal power over the natural world. Xenophon, writing in the early 4th century before the Common Era, describes with undisguised admiration the garden of the younger Cyrus at Sardis, where trees stand planted in perfect rows, each at precise intervals, the soil fragrant with carefully cultivated scents. The prince reportedly claims to have planted some of the trees with his own hands, a statement that shocks the Greek visitor, for whom manual labor and aristocratic identity cannot coexist. In Persian culture, the cultivation of land is a sacred act, aligned with Zoroastrian reverence for the earth as one of the 7 creations of Ahura Mazda. Beyond the gardens stretch the royal hunting parks, vast enclosed reserves stocked with lions, wild boar, deer, and onagers. Cylinder seal impressions from the 5th century depict mounted riders drawing composite bows at full gallop, loosing arrows into charging beasts. The hunt is not sport alone, but martial training and ritual performance of kingship. A monarch who slays a lion demonstrates fitness to rule. Stone reliefs and gold plaques repeat this iconography obsessively. The king as master of animals, imposing cosmic order upon wildness. At court, ceremonial life reaches extraordinary elaboration. Royal banquets host hundreds of guests arranged by strict hierarchical protocol. Greek observers report tables laden with roasted meats, saffron-infused rice dishes, pomegranate sauces, and honeyed pastries. Wine flows from gold and silver ritons shaped as winged griffins or leaping ibexes. The king dines behind a curtain, visible to none, his separateness reinforcing divine sanction. Guests receive portions calibrated to their rank, a system of honor expressed through food. The immortals, the elite 10,000-strong royal guard, maintain their permanent presence at these occasions. Their name derives from the practice of immediately replacing any fallen or ill member, so the unit never diminishes. They carry spears with silver pomegranate counterweights, wear richly embroidered robes over scale armor, and serve as both military force and ceremonial symbol of imperial permanence. Persian noble sons enter formal education at age 5. Herodotus records the curriculum's 3 pillars: to ride, to shoot the bow, and to tell the truth. Training continues until age 20. Young men learn horsemanship on the Nisaean horses bred in the Median highlands, tall, powerful animals prized across the ancient world. Archery practice begins with small bows, progressing to the powerful composite recurve bow capable of penetrating armor at considerable distance. But the emphasis on truth-telling reveals something deeper than military preparation. In a civilization where the supreme deity Ahura Mazda embodies truth and the cosmic enemy Angra Mainyu embodies falsehood, honesty is not merely social virtue but spiritual obligation. Royal inscriptions at Persepolis warn explicitly against the lie, positioning deceit as the gravest threat to cosmic and political order alike. This education produces an aristocratic class that governs satrapies, commands armies, and administers provinces spanning 3 continents. They carry with them the sensibility of the garden. That order imposed upon chaos through discipline, beauty, and patient cultivation is the highest expression of civilized power. Yet that aristocratic class, so carefully cultivated in truth and discipline, now enters a period where the empire's greatest threats emerge not from foreign battlefields, but from within its own corridors of power. In 465 before the Common Era, Artaxerxes I ascends the throne at Susa under a shadow of blood. His father Xerxes lies murdered in his own bedchamber, struck down by the courtier Artabanus and a eunuch named Aspamitres. The young king must first survive the conspirators who placed him on the throne before turning to govern an empire stretching from the Indus to the Nile. Within months, Artabanus himself is dead, eliminated by the very monarch he sought to control. The pattern that will define the next half-century announces itself immediately. Power in Persia now flows through palace whispers as much as royal decree. The gleaming halls of Susa, with their glazed brick friezes of striding lions and winged griffins, become a theater of calculation. Artaxerxes consolidates authority carefully, but the empire's periphery senses weakness in the transition. In Egypt, a Libyan prince named Inaros raises rebellion in 460 before the Common Era, rallying the Nile Delta against Persian garrisons. The revolt is no minor disturbance. Inaros secures Athenian naval support, and a fleet of 200 Greek triremes sails into the delta, joining Egyptian forces that have already destroyed a Persian army and killed the satrap Achaemenid, the king's own uncle. For 6 years the Egyptian revolt bleeds Persian resources. Reinforcements march across the Sinai. A Persian commander named Megabyzus finally corners the rebel forces at the island of Persepolis in the delta, diverting water channels to strand the Athenian fleet. By 454, the revolt collapses. Inaros is captured and eventually executed. The Athenian expedition ends in catastrophe, with most of the fleet destroyed, a disaster Athens rarely discusses but deeply feels. This Egyptian humiliation reshapes Persian strategy toward Greece. Rather than launching another massive invasion, Artaxerxes pursues diplomacy. Around 449 before the Common Era, the Peace of Callias establishes an informal understanding between Persia and Athens. Persian forces will not march west of the Halys River or sail into the Aegean. Athens will cease supporting rebellions in Persian territory. The empire trades military confrontation for strategic patience. Artaxerxes reigns for 41 years, dying in 424. His death triggers another succession bloodbath. Multiple sons claim the throne. Within weeks, 2 are dead. Darius II, born of a Babylonian concubine, emerges victorious, but his authority depends heavily on his formidable wife Perissatis, whose influence over court appointments and provincial governance becomes legendary in Greek sources. Darius II inherits an empire where satraps in Anatolia operate with increasing autonomy, maintaining their own armies, minting their own coins, conducting their own diplomacy. The western satrapies of Lydia and Phrygia function almost as independent principalities. Yet this decentralization proves strategically useful when Greece tears itself apart. The Peloponnesian War between Athens and Sparta, raging since 431, offers Persia an extraordinary opportunity. The satrapal courts of western Anatolia become diplomatic marketplaces. Tissaphernes, satrap of Lydia, and Pharnabazus, satrap of Hellespontine Phrygia, compete with each other to broker alliances with Greek factions. Persian gold flows to Sparta, funding the fleet that will ultimately destroy Athenian naval supremacy. The Treaty of Miletus in 412 formalizes the arrangement. Sparta acknowledges Persian sovereignty over the Greek cities of Asia Minor in exchange for financial support against Athens. It is a masterful inversion. The empire that failed to conquer Greece by force now purchases Greek obedience with treasury silver. The satraps who strain against central authority prove indispensable as diplomatic agents. The system bends without breaking, its contradictions temporarily serving imperial interests. But the reliance on gold rather than governance, on manipulation rather than strength, reveals an empire that has begun to manage decline rather than project power. The seeds of deeper fracture are already germinating in the soil of satrapal ambition and royal dependence on court intrigue rather than institutional renewal. Those fractures deepen with terrifying speed when the throne itself becomes contested. In 404 before the Common Era, Darius II dies at Susa, and the succession that follows tears the empire open from within. His eldest son takes the crown as Artaxerxes II, but his younger brother, Cyrus, named for the dynasty's founder and raised with a conqueror's ambition, refuses to accept subordination. Cyrus has served as satrap of Lydia, Greater Phrygia, and Cappadocia, commanding the western provinces with an authority that felt almost royal. He has tasted power, and he wants the rest. Through 402 and 401 before the Common Era, Cyrus assembles an army in Anatolia under the pretense of local campaigns. The deception is elaborate. He recruits nearly 13,000 Greek mercenaries, hardened hoplites drawn from across the Aegean world by promises of silver, and marches them eastward alongside his Persian levies without revealing the true objective. Only as the columns push deep into Mesopotamia, past the Euphrates crossing at Thapsacus, does the destination become unmistakable. They are marching on Babylon itself. The two armies collide at Cunaxa, roughly 70 kilometers north of Babylon, in the autumn of 401 before the Common Era. The flat Mesopotamian plain stretches endlessly under a pale sky, dust rising from tens of thousands of feet. The Greek mercenaries on Cyrus's right wing shatter the royal forces opposing them, driving the enemy from the field with disciplined phalanx warfare. But Cyrus himself, leading a cavalry charge at the center, drives recklessly toward his brother's position. He wounds Artaxerxes but is struck down and killed in the melee. The rebellion dies with him in the dust of that single afternoon. The Greek mercenaries now stand stranded, victorious on their flank but leaderless, deep inside hostile territory over 1,000 kilometers from the sea. When Persian commanders lure their generals to a parley and execute them, the survivors elect new leaders. Among them is Xenophon, an Athenian who will record the entire ordeal. The march of the 10,000 northward through Kurdistan and Armenia, fighting through mountain snow and hostile tribes until they reach the Black Sea coast at Trapezus, becomes one of antiquity's great survival narratives. The Anabasis Xenophon writes reveals something the Persian court does not yet grasp, that a small, disciplined Greek force can march through the heart of the empire and survive. Artaxerxes II reigns for 45 years, the longest rule of any Achaemenid king, yet his reign is defined by erosion rather than expansion. Egypt breaks free permanently around 404 before the Common Era, establishing native dynasties that resist every Persian attempt at reconquest. 3 major campaigns against the Nile Delta fail across the following decades, each repulsed by a combination of Egyptian fortifications, Greek mercenary defenders, and the treacherous geography of the delta's waterways. The deeper crisis erupts in the 360s before the Common Era, when multiple satraps across Anatolia and the Levant coordinate open rebellion against the throne. The great satraps' revolt sees provincial governors in Mysia, Caria, Lydia, and Phrygia acting as independent rulers, minting their own coinage and hiring their own mercenary armies. The revolt ultimately collapses through a combination of royal diplomacy, bribery, and the satraps' own mutual distrust. They betray each other before they can consolidate. But the pattern is devastating. The empire's provincial system, designed by Darius I to project central authority, has become a mechanism for cultivating rivals. Satrapal courts at Sardis and Halicarnassus now function as semi-autonomous kingdoms. Local dynasts like the Achaemenids of Caria build monumental architecture rivaling Persepolis in ambition. The gold that once bound the empire together now funds its fragmentation. Artaxerxes II dies around 358 before the Common Era, leaving a throne weakened not by foreign invasion, but by the slow dissolution of the bonds between center and periphery. The empire still stretches from the Aegean to Central Asia, still commands vast revenues, still fields enormous armies. But the coherence that once made it formidable is fraying thread by thread, and the generation now rising in Macedon is watching carefully. Artaxerxes III Ochus inherits that fraying empire and immediately reveals himself as a ruler of ruthless clarity. Within months of taking the throne in 358 before the Common Era, he orders the execution of more than 80 members of the royal family, eliminating every potential rival with a methodical violence that recalls the earliest days of Achaemenid succession struggles. The bloodletting is horrifying but effective. Satrapal courts that had drifted toward independence suddenly find themselves answering to a king who tolerates no ambiguity about where power resides. The great prize is Egypt. The Nile Valley has been independent for over 60 years, a standing humiliation to Persian authority. 2 previous expeditions under Artaxerxes II had failed disastrously, their armies swallowed by the delta's labyrinthine waterways and the tenacity of native pharaohs. Artaxerxes III launches his first attempt around 351 before the Common Era, and it too ends in retreat. But he does not abandon the objective. He rebuilds, recalculates, and in 343 before the Common Era returns with an enormous force supplemented by Greek mercenary commanders, including the Rhodian mentor. The campaign is devastating. Pelusium falls. Memphis falls. Nectanebo II, the last native pharaoh Egypt will ever know, flees south into Nubia and vanishes from history. Persian satraps once again govern from the banks of the Nile, and the empire momentarily recovers its full territorial extent from the Indus to the cataracts. At Susa, the court gleams with restored confidence. Persian naval squadrons patrol the eastern Mediterranean. Tribute flows again from 20 satrapies. The reconquest of Egypt demonstrates that Achaemenid power, when wielded with sufficient brutality and strategic patience, can still project force across thousands of kilometers. Yet the instrument of that restoration carries its own poison. The eunuch Bagoas, who served as kingmaker and military coordinator during the Egyptian campaign, has accumulated influence that shadows the throne itself. Around 338 before the Common Era, Bagoas poisons Artaxerxes III. The king who restored the empire through iron will dies at the hand of his most trusted courtier. Bagoas places the young prince Arses on the throne, expecting a pliable puppet. When Arses attempts to assert independence and reportedly plots against his handler, Bagoas murders him too, along with his children, in 336 before the Common Era. 2 kings poisoned in 2 years. The Achaemenid court has become a killing ground where proximity to power guarantees nothing but danger. Bagoas then elevates a distant member of the royal line, a satrap named Codomanus, who takes the throne name Darius III. This new king proves less malleable than expected. According to ancient sources, Darius forces Bagoas to drink his own poison, ending the eunuch's reign of manipulation. It is a dramatic assertion of royal authority, but it comes too late to matter. Across the Aegean, Philip II of Macedon has spent 2 decades forging the Greek world into a weapon. The Sarissa-armed phalanx, the companion cavalry, the siege engineers of Macedon represent a military revolution that no Persian strategist fully comprehends. When Philip is assassinated in 336 before the Common Era, the same year Darius III takes the throne, his 20-year-old son Alexander inherits not only a unified Greece, but an advance force already positioned on Asian soil at the Hellespont. The coincidence is staggering. The last Achaemenid king and the young Macedonian conqueror ascend to power in the same moment, as though history itself is arranging the final confrontation. Darius III commands the largest empire on earth, fields armies numbering in the hundreds of thousands, and controls wealth beyond Greek imagination. None of it will be enough. In the spring of 334 before the Common Era, Alexander crosses the Hellespont with roughly 37,000 soldiers, a fraction of what the Achaemenid Empire can muster. The army lands near the ancient site of Troy, where Alexander reportedly lays a wreath at the tomb attributed to Achilles. It is theatre as much as strategy, a young king wrapping himself in myth before marching into the heart of the oldest empire on earth. The first clash comes at the river Granicus in western Anatolia. Local Persian satraps command a cavalry force positioned along the riverbank, expecting the water crossing to break the Macedonian charge. It does not. Alexander leads the companion cavalry directly into the stream, and the fighting is brutal and close. Persian commanders fall in rapid succession. The satrapal army disintegrates. Greek mercenaries serving Persia, perhaps several thousand, are cut down or enslaved. Anatolia lies open. Darius III now takes the field personally, assembling an enormous force. Ancient sources claim 600,000, though modern estimates suggest closer to 100,000, and moves to intercept Alexander in the narrow coastal plain near Issus in 333 before the Common Era. The terrain negates Persian numerical superiority. Alexander drives his cavalry in a wedge directly toward the royal chariot. Darius flees. His mother, wife, and children fall into Macedonian hands. The imperial war chest at Damascus is captured. The psychological blow is devastating. The great king has abandoned his own family on the battlefield. Alexander does not pursue immediately. He turns south, reducing the Phoenician coast and besieging Tyre for 7 months before conquering Egypt, where he founds Alexandria. Only then does he wheel east toward Mesopotamia for the decisive encounter. At Gaugamela, near modern Mosul, on the 1st of October 331 before the Common Era, Darius has prepared the ground itself, leveling terrain for his scythed chariots and massing perhaps 250,000 troops across a vast front. Alexander commands 47,000. The Macedonian oblique advance again targets the Persian center. The scythed chariots prove ineffective as disciplined infantry simply open ranks and let them pass. Alexander punches through a gap in the Persian line, driving once more toward Darius. Again the great king turns and rides from the field. The imperial army collapses. Babylon opens its gates without resistance. The satrap of Susa surrenders the treasury, 50,000 talents of silver bullion. Alexander moves south into the Persian heartland, fighting through the Persian Gates Pass against a desperate rear guard. And in January of 330 before the Common Era, the Macedonian army enters Persepolis. For months the ceremonial capital serves as Alexander's headquarters. Then, in May, fire consumes the great complex. Whether deliberate vengeance for Xerxes' burning of Athens or a drunken accident following a banquet, ancient sources disagree, with Plutarch suggesting the courtesan Thais urged the act while Arrian implies calculated policy. The result is the same. The cedar roof beams of the Apadana catch flame. The throne hall burns. Carved reliefs depicting 23 nations in harmonious tribute blacken and crack. 2 centuries of imperial ceremony collapse into ash and rubble. Darius flees eastward through Media toward the Central Asian provinces, gathering what loyalists remain. But his own satrap Bessus, governor of Bactria, sees opportunity in catastrophe. Near Hecatompylos in the summer of 330 before the Common Era, Bessus and his co-conspirators seize Darius, stab him, and leave him dying in a wagon. Alexander's advance scouts find the body. The last Achaemenid king dies not in battle, but betrayed by his own nobility, the very system of satrapal delegation that had governed the empire for 2 centuries, turning finally and fatally against the throne it was designed to serve. Alexander survives Darius by less than 7 years. In the palace of Nebuchadnezzar at Babylon, in June of 323 before the Common Era, fever claims the Macedonian conqueror at the age of 32. His empire, stretching from Egypt to the borders of India, immediately fractures. Generals turn on generals. The wars of the Diadochi, the successors, consume decades in bloodshed and betrayal, carving Alexander's conquests into rival kingdoms. From this chaos, one commander emerges with a firm grip on the Iranian heartland and Mesopotamia, Seleucus, a cavalry officer who had fought at Gaugamela. By 312 before the Common Era, Seleucus establishes control over Babylon and begins building what will become the Seleucid Empire. He takes the title Nicator, the victor, and founds a dynasty that will govern the eastern Mediterranean and Iranian plateau for generations. His ambition is architectural as much as military. On the western bank of the Tigris, roughly 60 kilometers south of modern Baghdad, a new city rises from the alluvial plain, Seleucia on the Tigris. Laid out on a Hippodamian grid of intersecting streets, it grows into one of the largest cities in the ancient world, its population eventually approaching 600,000. Greek theatres stand alongside Mesopotamian market quarters. Temples to Zeus share neighborhoods with shrines to older Babylonian deities. This is the Seleucid experiment, an attempt to graft Hellenic culture onto ancient Near Eastern roots. Greek becomes the language of administration and elite discourse. Seleucid coinage bears portraits in the Greek style, kings depicted with diadems and idealized features. Gymnasiums appear in provincial cities, training grounds where Greek athletic and intellectual culture is performed and transmitted. Yet beneath this veneer, the deeper structures of Iranian and Mesopotamian life persist with remarkable tenacity. In the highlands of Fars, the old Achaemenid heartland, Iranian aristocratic families retain their estates and local authority. Fire temples continue to burn. The Magi perform rituals as they have for centuries, maintaining Zoroastrian traditions that no Greek decree can extinguish. Aramaic remains the practical language of commerce and local governance across vast stretches of the empire. Cuneiform scribes in Babylonian temples record astronomical observations using methods unchanged for millennia. The Seleucid kings, pragmatic above all, often accommodate these continuities rather than suppress them. Bilingual inscriptions appear, Greek and Aramaic side by side on official documents, acknowledging the reality of governing a population that is overwhelmingly non-Greek. Antiochus I, son of Seleucus, rebuilds temples in Babylon and patronizes local priesthoods. His successors adopt Near Eastern royal titles alongside Greek ones. Intermarriage between Greek settlers and Iranian noble families blurs ethnic boundaries within a generation. The Seleucid court at Antioch may speak Greek, but the satraps governing eastern provinces increasingly answer to local realities more than royal commands. This is the empire's fatal weakness. The Seleucid realm is too vast, too diverse, too thinly administered by its Greek military colonies. By the mid-3rd century before the Common Era, the eastern provinces begin to slip away. In Bactria, the Greek governor Diodotus declares independence around 250 before the Common Era, founding a Greco-Bactrian kingdom that will produce some of the finest Hellenistic coinage ever minted. And in the northeastern province of Parthia, something more consequential stirs. Around 247 before the Common Era, a tribal leader named Artaxerxes leads his Parni nomads into Parthian territory, exploiting Seleucid distraction during a Western war. He establishes a small kingdom that seems, at first, insignificant. One more breakaway province in an empire losing its grip. The Seleucids attempt reconquest but cannot sustain campaigns across such distances. The Arsacid foothold holds, it grows. Persian identity, submerged but never drowned beneath the Hellenistic surface, begins to find new political expression. The fire temples still burn, the old noble families still remember who they are. And in the mountains east of the Caspian Sea, a dynasty is taking root that will reclaim the imperial tradition and carry it forward for nearly 5 centuries. That small Arsacid kingdom east of the Caspian does not remain small for long. Within a generation, the dynasty consolidates control over the old satrapy of Parthia and begins pressing westward into the weakening Seleucid frontier. The critical transformation arrives under Mithridates I, who ascends to the Arsacid throne around 171 before the Common Era, and spends the next 3 decades reshaping the political map of the ancient world. By 141, his cavalry rides into Seleucia on the Tigris, and Mesopotamia, the heartland of every great empire since Sumer, passes into Parthian hands. The Seleucids, now confined to rump territories in Syria, never recover it. The city of Ctesiphon rises on the eastern bank of the Tigris, directly opposite Seleucia, becoming the new imperial seat. Its layout reflects the Arsacid genius for synthesis: Greek colonnaded streets alongside Iranian audience halls, Aramaic scribes working beside administrators who invoke Ahura Mazda. The royal treasury at Nisa, near modern Ashgabat, fills with ivory rhytons carved in Hellenistic style, yet depicting scenes from Iranian mythology. This is not imitation. It is absorption, a civilization digesting foreign influence and converting it into something distinctly its own. Under Mithridates II, who reigns from approximately 124 to 88 before the Common Era, the Arsacid state claims the ancient title King of Kings. Ambassadors from Han Dynasty China arrive along the Silk Road, which now passes directly through Parthian territory. Caravans carrying Chinese silk, Indian spices, and Central Asian jade funnel through Parthian customs posts, generating revenues that finance a military unlike anything the Western world has encountered. That military reveals its terrifying effectiveness at Carrhae in 53 before the Common Era. Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, crosses the Euphrates with roughly 40,000 legionaries seeking glory to match his rivals, Pompey and Caesar. The Parthian general Surena meets him on the flat plains of Upper Mesopotamia with a force built around 2 components: heavily armored cataphracts bearing long lances and swift horse archers carrying composite bows. The archers circle the Roman squares in relentless loops, firing backward at full gallop in the technique the Greeks call the Parthian shot. A camel train resupplies arrows continuously. The legions, trained for close combat, cannot close the distance. By nightfall, 20,000 Romans lie dead. 10,000 more are captured. Crassus himself is killed during a failed parley. Rome has not suffered such a disaster since Cannae. The defeat at Carrhae establishes the Euphrates as a boundary that Rome will struggle to cross for centuries. Parthian and Roman armies clash repeatedly. Mark Antony's failed invasion in 36 before the Common Era, Trajan's brief capture of Ctesiphon in 116 of the Common Era, further Roman sacks in 165 and 198. Yet each time the Parthians reconstitute. Their decentralized feudal structure, with powerful noble houses controlling regional armies, proves resilient against foreign invasion even as it breeds chronic internal rivalry. The Arsacid court patronizes Zoroastrian fire temples while tolerating Greek theater performances in cities like Babylon, where Greek language inscriptions persist into the 1st century of the Common Era. Buddhist missionaries pass through eastern provinces. Jewish communities flourish in Mesopotamian cities under Parthian protection. This pluralism mirrors the old Achaemenid model, adapted to a feudal framework where the King of Kings rules through alliance rather than absolute command. Yet that same feudal structure eventually becomes fatal. By the early 3rd century of the Common Era, the last Arsacid king, Artabanus IV, faces not a foreign invader, but a vassal from the Persian heartland of Fars, the very province where Cyrus once rose. A local ruler named Artaxerxes, claiming descent from a priest named Sassan, defeats Artabanus at the Battle of Hormozdgan in 224. The Arsacid dynasty, which endured for nearly 5 centuries, falls to a new Persian house that will consciously revive Achaemenid grandeur and carry Iranian civilization to its final pre-Islamic zenith. Artaxerxes moves swiftly after Hormozdgan. Within 2 years he seizes Ctesiphon, the old Parthian winter capital on the Tigris, and crowns himself Shahanshah, King of Kings, in a deliberate echo of Achaemenid titulature. Rock reliefs carved at Firuzabad in Fars show the moment of investiture. Ahura Mazda, mounted on horseback, extends the beribboned ring of sovereignty to the new king. The Sasanian dynasty announces itself not as an innovation, but as a restoration. Artaxerxes reorganizes the empire around centralized authority, dismantling the feudal autonomy that weakened the Arsacids. He elevates Zoroastrianism from a loosely practiced tradition to something approaching a state religion, empowering the Magi priesthood with judicial and administrative roles. Fire temples multiply across the provinces. The sacred fires at Adur Gushnasp, Adur Farnbag, and Adur Burzanmir become pilgrimage sites, binding the empire's spiritual geography. Artaxerxes' son Shapur I inherits this revitalized state in 240 and immediately turns westward. Rome, distracted by its own crisis of the 3rd century, proves vulnerable. Shapur campaigns across Mesopotamia and Syria, sacking Antioch. Then, in 260, the unthinkable occurs. The Roman Emperor Valerian marches east with perhaps 70,000 soldiers and meets catastrophe near Edessa. Valerian himself is captured alive, the only Roman emperor ever taken prisoner by a foreign enemy. The triumph is immortalized in stone at Nakhchi-Rostam, where a colossal relief shows Shapur on horseback, Valerian kneeling before him in submission. At Bishapur, another relief depicts the same scene with even greater elaboration. Roman prisoners paraded beneath the hooves of the Sasanian cavalry. These carvings are not mere propaganda. They are declarations carved into the living rock of Fars, placed deliberately beside the Achaemenid tombs, linking the new dynasty to the old. Ctesiphon grows into one of the ancient world's great cities. Its crowning monument is the Ta Khasra, the great vaulted hall whose unreinforced brick arch spans 37 meters and rises to a height of 35, the largest single-span vault of the ancient world. The hall serves as the throne room of the Sasanian kings, its interior once adorned with carpets, brocades, and the legendary spring of Khosrow carpet depicting a garden in gemstones. Sasanian silver plates, hammered and gilded, depict royal hunts and banquets with a refinement that influences metalwork from Byzantium to Tang dynasty China. The Academy of Gondishapur, founded in the southwestern province of Khuzestan, becomes the ancient world's most advanced center of learning. Greek, Syriac, and Indian scholars converge there, translating medical texts, refining astronomical tables, and practicing surgery. Nestorian Christian physicians work alongside Zoroastrian herbalists. Indian mathematical concepts, including positional notation, filter westward through its classrooms. The Golden Age crystallizes under Khosrow I, who ascends the throne in 531. Known as Anushirvan, the immortal soul, he reforms taxation into a fixed system based on land surveys rather than arbitrary assessments. He divides the empire into 4 military districts, each commanded by a sparbed, replacing the old reliance on noble levies with professional administration. Justice becomes his defining legacy. Later Islamic tradition credits him with the principle that a kingdom may endure with unbelief, but not with injustice. The game of chess, chatrang in Middle Persian, emerges in his court, a strategic abstraction of warfare that will travel to Arabia, Europe, and the world. Silk production, long a Chinese monopoly, begins within Sasanian borders after silkworm eggs are smuggled westward, transforming the textile economy. Khosrow's empire stretches from the Oxus to the Euphrates, rivaling Byzantium in wealth, sophistication, and ambition. For a brief, luminous half-century, the Iranian plateau once again stands at the center of civilization, its fire temples burning, its silver gleaming, its scholars translating the accumulated wisdom of 3 continents into a synthesis that will outlast the dynasty itself. Khosrow II, grandson of that golden king, ascends in 590 and immediately plunges the Sasanian state into its most ambitious and most ruinous war. When the Byzantine Emperor Maurice is murdered in 602, Khosrow seizes the pretext of avenging his former patron. Sasanian armies sweep westward with astonishing speed. Damascus falls in 613. Jerusalem in 614, its relic of the true cross carried back to Ctesiphon. Egypt, the ancient granary, submits by 619. For a fleeting moment, the Sasanian Empire approximates the borders of the Achaemenids themselves, stretching from the Oxus to the Nile. Yet the cost is staggering. Treasury reserves drain, provincial levies thin the agricultural workforce, and Byzantium does not die. The Emperor Heraclius launches a desperate counter-offensive through Armenia in 622, striking deep into the Iranian heartland. By 628, Khosrow is overthrown by his own son, and the peace that follows restores every conquered territory. A decade of catastrophic war has achieved nothing but the exhaustion of both empires. In the Arabian Peninsula, a new force coalesces with extraordinary speed. Arab-Muslim armies, unified by faith and hardened by desert warfare, cross into Sasanian Mesopotamia. At Al-Qadisiyah in 636, the Sasanian general Rostam Farrukhzad commands a vast force bolstered by war elephants, but the Arab cavalry proves relentless across 3 days of brutal fighting. Rostam falls. The imperial banner, the Darafsh Kaviani, legendary standard of Iranian kingship, is captured. Ctesiphon itself is taken, its treasuries looted, the great arch of Tak Khazra standing silent over an emptied capital. 6 years later, at Nahavand in 642, the last organized Sasanian field army is destroyed in what Arab historians call the Victory of Victories. The young king Yazdegerd III flees eastward across the plateau, a sovereign without a kingdom, seeking refuge among his own satraps. In 651, near the city of Merv in distant Khorasan, he is murdered, tradition says by a local miller, and the Sasanian dynasty ends not with a final battle, but with a fugitive king dying far from his throne. Yet Persia does not vanish. It transforms, as it has always transformed. The Arabic script replaces Pahlavi, but the Persian language survives, re-emerging by the 9th and 10th centuries as New Persian, written in Arabic characters yet carrying the rhythms and vocabulary of an older world. Ferdowsi completes the Shahnameh around the year 1060,000 couplets, preserving the mythic and historical memory of pre-Islamic Iran. Persian becomes the literary language of courts from Ottoman Anatolia to Mughal India. The garden tradition, the Chahar Bagh with its 4 quadrants and central water channels, flows into Islamic palace design at the Alhambra, into Mughal splendor at the Taj Mahal, into European landscape architecture. Persian scientists, poets, and philosophers, Avicenna, Rumi, Omar Khayyam, build upon foundations laid in Gondi Shapur and the Zoroastrian academies. And in a glass case in the British Museum, a small clay cylinder covered in Babylonian cuneiform endures. The Cyrus cylinder, fashioned 25 centuries ago, declaring the rights of conquered peoples to worship their own gods and live by their own customs. In 1971, the United Nations recognizes it as a symbol of universal human rights. Each spring, on the vernal equinox, millions still celebrate Nowruz, the ancient Persian New Year, setting tables with 7 symbolic items, leaping over fire, greeting the turning of the season exactly as their ancestors did when Persepolis gleamed white against the mountains of Fars. The empire is gone. The civilization breathes on. Thank you for joining this journey across 3,000 years of Persian history. If these stories have moved or inspired you, consider subscribing so you never miss what comes next.